прибув президент України. Судячи з усього, йому показують деталі літаків, хоча, здається, він про них і так все знає. Просто очікує, коли вже вони будуть на території України.
Watch your head, watch your back, and then just step on the chair.
This is my video update from Larnaca, Cyprus on this Sunday morning, August the 20th. Let's talk about some news, and let's start things off with Elensky's trip to Sweden. So yesterday we found out that Elensky and his wife, Elenska, they decided to travel to Sweden. And while in Sweden, they met with Prime Minister Ulf Kristersson, King Charles, Queen Sylvia, Speaker Andreas Norlin, and Chairman of Parliamentary Parties. Here is what Elensky tweeted out. Ukraine and Sweden have more in common than just flag colors. Centuries of common history, a common current strength, and a future in safe and free Europe. This is what Ukraine is fighting for, with Sweden's strong support. I thank the Swedish royal family, Prime Minister Ulf Kristersson, and the entire government, Riksdag, and political parties, as well as every Swede. Tack Sverige. So, according to Elensky, Sweden and Ukraine are, pretty much one and the same. They are brotherly nations with the same flag colors. And Elensky also said, while he was in Sweden, he also said that Sweden has Ukraine's full support for NATO membership, which is very important because Ukraine is not a member of the NATO alliance and is not even a candidate country, but it absolutely supports Sweden's entry into NATO. And also while in Sweden, we had news that Ukraine and Sweden have agreed on joint production of CV-90 infantry fighting vehicles. A statement of intent was signed. A statement of intent, that's important, was signed between Sweden and Ukraine to produce CV-90 infantry fighting vehicles, not in Sweden, but in Ukraine. A joint project to produce these fighting vehicles in Ukraine, according to a statement of intent that was signed. We all know what would happen if this statement of intent turned into an actual contract and production of CV-90 vehicles actually started up in Ukraine. I think we all know what would happen to that factory if this actually did happen, which is why this joint venture, or the intent to start this joint venture, is just a bunch of bollocks. Excuse the language. And Elensky, he also went to Sweden to lobby the Swedish government to hand over Gripen fighter jets to Ukraine. This is according to Reuters. Elensky said that Ukraine has begun negotiations with Sweden on the possibility of obtaining Gripen fighters, because it doesn't matter what type of fighter jet you're talking about, whether it's a Gripen or an F16 or an F-35 or a Cessna, whatever. As long as it flies, it's all good, according to Ukraine, right? You don't have to think about training or the languages that you need to know in order to operate the fighter jet. Just give us something that flies, and that is all we need to push back the Russians in this failed big spring counteroffensive, which leads me to believe that this meeting between Elensky and the Swedish government in order to try and convince the Swedish government to hand over Gripens to Ukraine is nothing more than a bluff. That is all that is going on here. It's Elensky's way of traveling to Sweden and to try and put pressure on the U.S., on the U.S. Congress, to give their approval to send F-16s to Ukraine by saying, you know what, if you don't give me F-16s, well then I'm going to take the money that you're giving me and I'm going to hand it over to Sweden so that we can obtain Gripen fighter jets. That's basically what Elensky is doing. It's a bluff. He's acting. He's an actor. He's a clown puppet actor. And he's traveling to Sweden. He's making a big deal about obtaining Gripen fighter jets instead of F-16s to tell the citizens of the collective West, you lose. You guys could have sent us all these F-16s and it would have been the United States and the F-16s that would have turned the tide of this conflict. But instead, it's going to be Gripen fighter jets that are going to turn the tide of this conflict. It's nonsense. This whole thing is nonsense. We already know that Ukraine is having, or the Biden White House is having a hard time with this whole F-16 issue, because not only do they have to train Ukraine pilots to fly the F-16s, but they also have to teach them English. And the latest reports are that to date, we have 6 Ukrainian pilots who have been chosen to learn F-16 English before they even start to train on the actual F-16. So what is going to happen with the Gripen fighter jet? Is the language going to be English, or do we have to train 6 Ukrainian pilots to learn Swedish before they then start to train on the Gripen fighter jets, which will take how long? 3 months, 6 months, 10 months? And then what's going to happen? These Ukrainian pilots are going to engage with Russian pilots in these Gripen fighter jets, Russian pilots which have 10, 15 years of experience. Yeah, how's that going to work out? This is nonsense. It's all nonsense, and it's a bluff from Elensky. He is acting. If Sweden were to actually provide Gripens to Ukraine, those Gripens would burn just the same as if the Biden White House was to supply F-16s to Ukraine. This is not going to happen. And if it does happen, well, that's bad news for Sweden and bad news for Sweden's military-industrial complex, because the Russians are going to demolish those Gripen fighter jets. Anyway, the Washington Post, they put out an article today with the title, Ukraine Running Out of Options to Retake Significant Territory. And here is what the Washington Post says in the first 2 paragraphs of this article. Ukraine appears to be running out of options in a counteroffensive that officials originally framed as Kiev's crucial operation to retake significant territory from occupying Russian forces this year. More than 2 months into the fight, the counteroffensive shows signs of stalling. Kiev's advance remains isolated to a handful of villages. Russian troops are pushing forward in the north, and the plan to train Ukrainian pilots on US-made F-16s is delayed. You know, every once in a while, the Washington Post gets it kind of right. And in this instance, they kind of get it right. In their own language, in their own way, they kind of get the problem. They summarize the problem that Ukraine and the collective West is facing. And the Washington Post is saying that the counteroffensive has failed to retake significant territory, which is actually code for has failed. That's what the Washington Post is trying to say. The Washington Post says that the counteroffensive is stalling. It's a stalemate, which means it's going nowhere. it has failed to take significant territory. The Washington Post says that it's only achieved the capture of a handful of isolated villages, which means that they haven't made it to the first line of Russian defenses. And it admits that Russian troops are advancing in the north in the direction of Kupiansk, though it doesn't get into any of the details. It doesn't mention Kupiansk, but it does let its readers know that you know what, while there's a stalemate in the south, Russian troops are advancing in the north. So it kind of lets its readers in on that information. And then, of course, it talks about the delayed F-16s. That is the article from the Washington Post, the delayed F-16s. So Olaf Scholz, he was giving a speech in Germany, and he was asked if German troops are going to enter the conflict in Ukraine. Are we going to see German boots on the ground in Ukraine? And Olaf Scholz replied by saying that it is his aim to prevent this. He was asked whether there is a danger of Germany becoming actively involved in the war. Scholz replied by saying that, and I quote, "It is his aim to prevent this, and that this is why there is no German soldiers in Ukraine, and there won't be any except for the German mercenaries that are in Ukraine." But Olaf Scholz said that there will be no German soldiers in Ukraine. He did say that Berlin will continue to supply Ukraine with weapons. He added that each decision in this respect has been taken cautiously and in coordination with allies. According to Scholz, the West does not want the conflict to develop into a war between Russia and NATO. So Olaf Scholz is preventing a war between Russia and NATO by escalating the proxy war in Ukraine. And this statement from Olaf Scholz, in my opinion, his statement that at this moment in time there won't be any German soldiers actively involved in the war in Ukraine, and that he is trying to prevent German soldiers from entering the conflict in Ukraine by providing weapons to the Elensky regime. To me, this is Olaf Scholz's way of softening up the German public to the reality that Germany will eventually be providing Taurus long-range missiles to the Elensky regime. That is basically the statement that Olaf Scholz is making here at this event. German soldiers will not be active in this conflict, but we are going to continue to provide weapons to Ukraine so that German soldiers do not have to fight Russia. And the part that he left out is that pretty soon in our weapons escalation with Russia, we will be providing Taurus long-range missiles. That's the point that Olaf Scholz is trying to make in this message. He is preparing the German population for the announcement of those Taurus long-range missiles to Ukraine. And we have an article from Politico which claims that U.S. officials admit that they missed an opportunity for peace in Ukraine. With Kiev's counteroffensive failing, the White House now recognizes that it should have heeded earlier calls for talks, anonymous sources have claimed. And in this article from Politico, they say that General Mark Milley was the one voice that was calling for negotiations to take place, and the Biden White House ignored Milley's calls. We may have missed a window to push for earlier talks, a U.S. official told Politico on Friday, adding that Milley had a point. Speaking in New York in November, Milley said that a military victory would likely be unachievable for Ukraine and that Kiev could use the wintertime pause in fighting to enter negotiations with Moscow and avoid any further losses. Milley's comments at that time angered officials in Kiev and caused panic in the White House. And this is kind of true. It's a half truth because Milley has at times talked about using pauses in fighting to negotiate some sort of a freeze in the conflict. But he has also been one of the voices in the Biden White House calling for escalation as well. He has talked about how the Russian military is weak, how the Russian military is losing. He has talked about how the Ukraine military can defeat the Russian military, and he has been one of the voices who has been calling for more escalation and more military support to the Elensky regime in order to defeat the Russian military. So, Milley has been playing both sides, to be quite honest. At times, he has been calling for a pause in hostilities, as at times he has been calling for negotiations, but at other times he has been calling for escalation and for more war. But what this political article, does admit is that there is a discussion, a debate that is taking place in the Biden White House between the neocons who want more escalation and various other voices in the Biden White House and in the Pentagon, which understand that Ukraine has lost this conflict and it is time to find an acceptable off-ramp. Let's now move on to the European Union. And we have a report which claims that the EU is ready to place sanctions on Poland. You didn't see that one coming. Yeah, the European Union is considering sanctions on Poland because the European Union is upset that Poland is going to extend the ban on grain from Ukraine. I talked about this in a video I made last week, where Poland came out with a statement and they said that when the EU ban on Ukrainian grain ends in September, Poland will continue to ban grain. You see, Poland has an election in October, I believe October 14th is the election in Poland, and the last thing that the Law and Justice Party wants is for farmers to begin protesting the entry of cheap and not so healthy, from what I gather, from what I've read, not so healthy Ukrainian grain into Poland. And so what Poland is going to do, what the Law and Justice Party said they're going to do, is that they are going to extend the ban on Ukrainian grain at least until after the elections. And this has pissed off the European Union, and they are now threatening sanctions against Poland. Boy, I hope the EU places sanctions on Poland. Is that a bad thing to say? Is that a bad thing to say? The EU is just, they're sanctioning everybody and everything. When did the EU discover sanctions? Like a couple of years ago, they discovered sanctions, and ever since they've discovered sanctions, they've gone sanction crazy. And so they are now saying that they're going to sanction Poland. Poland makes more profit when Ukraine sells no grain. Polish farmers have become the next source of grain after Ukraine since the beginning of the conflict. It's a pretty smart move by Poland. This is coming from the Twitter account of Spetsnaz007. So that is that is the news out of the European Union. This is like a pre-clown world, because now we can get into our main clown world story, and this is coming from Jungle Joseph Borrell, and he stated yesterday that Russia is a gas station with atomic bombs. The country's economy is weak due to its dependence on energy exports, the top EU diplomat has claimed. This is Europe's top diplomat, top diplomat, the number one diplomat, Jungle Joseph Borrell, parroting one-time Senator John McCain's famous statements that he made something like 15 or 20 years ago, where John McCain said that Russia is nothing more than a gas station masquerading as a country. And here we are 15, 20 years later, and Jungle Joseph Borrell is repeating that statement from John McCain. Now, here's a tweet from the account of Megatron. I think that this Twitter account sums things up better than I ever could. Megatron says, "How did people with such low intelligence manage to occupy highly responsible positions in the EU?" EU Foreign Policy Chief Joseph Borrell says that while China is a real geopolitical player, Russia is an economic dwarf, and like a gas station whose owner has an atomic bomb. Let's analyze the owner of the Borrell the Jungle comment. Russia, or the irrelevant economic dwarf, has cracked their Hollywood marketing weapons with its own technology and homemade weapons, and is about to break the back of the West in Ukraine. Russia showed and proved to them that it is economically so strong and resistant to their sanctions, which began to drag the Western countries towards recession, inflation, and huge foreign debts. It is Russia that started the multipolar world and the initial rejection of the dollar as the world's reserve currency. That economic dwarf also did the arrogant a favor to be kicked out of Africa. Russia managed to show the world how the EU of the Borrell the Jungle is a total vassal of the USA and has no influence on world geopolitics. Europe has and will sink from such arrogant and low intelligence politicians who have been appointed by the United States. Bro, Megatron, Megatron, that was so spot on. Man, he just demolished Jungle Joseph Borrell. Wow. Oh boy, so much mileage from the John McCain gas station statement that he made a decade plus ago. The collective West has gotten so much mileage from that statement. My God.
Russia is a gas station masquerading as a country.
Who would have ever guessed that John McCain calling Russia a gas station would have been repeated up until 2023 by collective West top diplomats, and that this statement would be so internalized by the collective West that they would base their entire Russian foreign policy on that one statement from an insane neocon like John McCain, who, by the way, was in Maidan in 2014 speaking to the Maidan protesters calling for the overthrow of the democratically elected Yanukovych government. That is John McCain. That was Senator John McCain. But his comment about the the gas station masquerading as a country. Boy, the collective West really cannot let go of this comment. They've internalized this thing to the point where it has destroyed Ukraine. It has destroyed the EU. It has deindustrialized Germany. It has demilitarized the entire collective West. It's destroying the US dollar and the US financial system. I mean, give it up. Give it up, collective West. Enough already. I think it's pretty safe to say, I think it's pretty okay to admit that Russia is much more than a gas station masquerading as a country, or a country masquerading as a gas station, or whichever way you want to look at it. Oh boy, that comment from John McCain. Who would have ever thought that when he made that comment, it would become US, Russian foreign policy doctrine? That one comment became the collective West's foreign policy stance towards Russia, to the point where the belief in the gas station narrative has led to the demise and the collapse of the entire collective West. Unbelievable stuff. Anyway, that is John McCain. And that is the clown world for today. So this place right here used to be the most popular coffee shop in Larnaca. And it's right across from the water. I mean, you can't get closer to the water than this place right here. And it used to run 24 hours a day, and it was just packed with people. And it was really, really open, and a lot of light used to come in, and it was just a great place to sit down, have a coffee, and relax, and just, stare into the Mediterranean, into the Mediterranean waters. And then they decided to darken it up, to put all of these things in front, these tents, to block it off from the air and from the sea, and they painted the whole interior in this very like dark motif, and it closed. It closed. So yeah, if there's anybody that knows the coffee restaurant business, this is as good a spot as any. All right, so that's the video, everybody. theduran.locals.com. We are on Rockfin, ODYSEE, BitChute, Telegram, and where else? And Rumble. And right now I'm walking past the famous Charmer's restaurant. Hello. This is the best food in all of Cyprus, the best seafood, the best steaks, the best food in all of Cyprus. The best service.
Oh,
I am good. How are you? So if people come here and they come to Larnaca and they come to Charmer's and they say, Alex sent me a free bottle of wine. You heard it from the man himself, the man in charge of this beautiful restaurant. All right, everybody, free wine or a free pint if you don't drink wine. Thank you. So Charmer's, this is where you need to come if you visit Larnaca, and you heard it right there from the owner of the establishment. Free wine or a free pint of beer if you say that Alex sent you. All right, everybody, that is the video. Take care.